I, 47 male. I'm getting married to my beautiful girlfriend. 34 female of 4.5 years in less than a week. This is my second engagement. 11 years ago, I almost got married to my ex-girlfriend, 38 female. She was my high school sweetheart, and we've been together for almost 10 years. So naturally, we even lived together for 5 years. So naturally, I was ready to get married. It seems like I was not the only one shocked. She appeared to be as well. My family held a positive view of my ex, and they were excited when I shared the news of our engagement. However, things took an unexpected turn just one day before the wedding when my ex ended up having a romantic encounter with my 34-year-old brother. Adding to the shock, my ex had suggested that I spend the night before the wedding at a hotel, believing it was necessary to stay separately to avoid bad luck. And I did what she asked of me. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I'd forgotten my shoes back home and had to go back for them a few hours after I'd reached the hotel. When I went back home, I was surprised to see that the lights were out in the living room since my ex hated turning out the lights while leaving a room and couldn't believe that she'd remembered. I went in and headed straight to the bedroom since that's where I kept the shoebox, because that's how special it was to me. But when I opened the door to my room, I was greeted with the worst thing I'd ever seen. My ex was lying in bed with my little brother and was so caught up in their act that they barely even noticed that I'd entered the room. It took only a few seconds for them to notice me, but I was completely frozen, unsure of how to react. My world crumbled around me, and as soon as I comprehended what I had just witnessed, I instinctively made a run for it. Despite my ex calling after me, I drove back to the hotel in a state of hyperventilation and panic, outright refusing to accept what I had seen. I was supposed to get married the next day, so this was just insane. It took me a while to compose myself once I got to my room, and when I finally managed to calm down, I ended up sobbing for at least an hour. Thankfully, I hadn't told my ex which hotel I was in, so she couldn't get to me and could only text me, which is what she did. Following the incident, she bombarded me with apology texts, attempting to convince me that it was a one-time occurrence. However, I remained highly skeptical of her explanation. She also mentioned feeling overwhelmed by the upcoming wedding, claiming she needed to blow off some steam. According to her, my brother had always been there for her, leaving her unsure of whom else to turn to in that moment. I could hardly believe that she was even trying to explain herself after what I'd seen and blocked her immediately. I also blocked my brother since I wasn't interested in any of their bullcrap. Apologies. It took me a while, but I managed to pull myself together and canceled all the arrangements for the wedding. First and foremost, because no matter how much money I lost, I was going to get out of this mess. My ex had just wasted 10 years of my life, so I didn't mind wasting a few $1,000s as long as it meant that I wouldn't have to be with her anymore. The next thing that I did was I called my parents up and told them what had happened. They were really confused about whether they should be consoling me or cutting my brother off. I allowed them some time to contemplate the situation. By then, it was late in the evening, so I ordered dinner for myself and then cried myself to sleep. Following that day, I encountered my ex only twice. The first time was when she returned home to gather her belongings and leave. The second time occurred a couple of years later at a mutual friend's party, where she attempted to engage in conversation with me. But I left as soon as I spotted her coming my way. My brother and I also haven't spoken since then, because my parents have cut him off for what he did to me. Last I heard, he was working in Europe, and hasn't come back here for 3 years now. Anyway, that was all in the past, and I've managed to move on from that horrible episode. I'm in a better place now, and definitely was a better woman, whom I trust wholeheartedly. It was all going well until a few days back, exactly 1 week before my wedding. My ex reached out to me. I don't know how she found out about me or my wedding, but she contacted me from a new Facebook account. Since I'd blocked her original account first, and sent me a ton of messages about how devastated she was to hear that I was getting married again. It struck me as odd that she used the term again, considering that, despite the near marriage, we were never officially married. Nevertheless, the situation felt like a total deja vu. The way she pleaded for me to take her back, despite her actions, and claimed that I was the only man she'd ever loved, had a profound impact on me. And I even told my fiancé about it immediately. Part of me was so perturbed by this that I wanted to give her a piece of my mind for bothering me before my wedding. But another more unforgiving part of me really wanted revenge. I knew that I'd done the right thing all those years back, and had dealt with the situation like an adult. However, this time around, I harbored a strong desire to inflict emotional pain on her to the extent that she wouldn't even consider reaching out to me again. When I confided in my fiancé about these feelings, she fully supported the idea. Despite her own experiences of being cheated on in the past, acknowledging that our relationship wasn't a 10-year one, it still left a painful impact. So she knew how I felt. So this time, instead of just letting it go, we came up with a plan to get revenge and make sure that my ex went through the same heartache that she put me through. This is why a couple of hours after I received her text, I decided to text her back, saying that I was finally ready to talk to her. She expressed her readiness to come to my place immediately, but I suggested she get a room in a nearby hotel. I promised to meet her there the next day to avoid raising suspicions with my fiancé. Throughout this conversation, my fiancé was right beside me, and surprisingly, she agreed to the plan, and so the next day I went to her hotel. At the time we agreed upon, she seemed overjoyed to see me and was actually crying happy tears, but she'd be crying real tears in a couple of minutes. She sat me down and started explaining how she'd been so sorry about what had happened for these past 12 years. I wanted to make it up to me, but didn't know how to get through to me until she heard from a friend that I was getting married again. She believed that sending one last text was crucial, fearing she would lose me forever if she didn't. I feigned interest, attentively listening and holding her hands while she spoke. All the while, I anxiously awaited my fiancé's arrival. After almost 20 minutes, a knock on the door signaled her presence, prompting me to rush and open it. My fiancé answered, followed by all of our groomsmen and bridesmaids wearing masks of my brother's face. They'd carried a cake in as well, and even that had my brother's face smiling up at us. My ex was horrified and couldn't even come up with words to say anything. We yelled surprise eyes while she looked on with a shocked expression on her face, because I'm sure nobody would have ever seen this coming. We've managed to convince the hotel staff that we were surprising her, and it was relatively easy, since she'd already informed them to let in any guest who wanted to visit her, which she'd meant just for me. But I had other plans. After she was able to process what was happening, she started sobbing and mumbling some incoherent gibberish while crying. I wasn't inclined to let her off the hook so easily. Messaging me just a week before my wedding, after cheating on me with my own brother the day before we were supposed to get married, was audacious. Now, she had to confront the consequences of her actions. I made it clear that this was what she deserved, and any chance of reconciliation, if ever, would only be considered after her betrayal. Then she was dead wrong. She had no business texting me after what she'd put me through, and I was glad that she was hurt by what I'd done because she'd brought it upon herself. I was really cold and curt while saying all of this, but she continued to sob and said that if I didn't want her back, then I should have just ignored and blocked her instead of going out of my way to humiliate her like this. But I didn't feel sorry for her in the slightest. Not then. Not now. I told her never to speak to me again, and then left her crying by herself in the hotel room. Now I'm supposed to get married in 2 days, but some of my fiancé's friends want me to apologize to my ex since they think that the way I told her off that day was harsh. Despite her actions, some may argue that she didn't deserve this. However, my groomsmen, who have known me since middle school, don't share this sentiment. They are fully aware of the battles I faced with depression and fighting for my life in the years following my breakup with my ex due to the circumstances. They understand the depth of my love for her and what she meant to me, so they didn't judge or mind what I had done. My fiancé's friends had probably been expecting some high school drama that they could gossip about later, but this was too raw and real for them. My fiancé is on my side and doesn't think I should apologize, but her friends are refusing to be part of the wedding. If I don't do that now, I'm really torn up because on one hand, I don't want my fans to be upset on our wedding day. After all, she really values her friends, but I also don't think I owe my ex any apology at all. She could have just stayed out of my life and this never would have happened, but she just didn't want to see me happy. In fact, she still tried to play the victim here and keep sending texts from spam accounts about how I broke her heart, and that this will definitely come back to me someday. I don't particularly care for this brand of emotional manipulation, not from my ex, and most certainly not from my fiancé's bridesmaids. Now I know that she's never going to tell me to apologize just for her sake, but I sort of feel obliged to at this point, and that's why I'm here. I'm running out of time, and I need to decide what I'm going to do right now. 80 for humiliating my cheating ex after she tried to get back with me just a week before my wedding. Update 1. So the response on this has been pretty diverse to say the least. There's just 1 day to go until the wedding, and I decided to speak to my fiancé before I actually do anything. Like most people have suggested, I talked to her about how I've been feeling, and as soon as I told her, she said that I absolutely didn't have to apologize to my ex just because her bridesmaids fought so, and if that offended them, then they could skip her wedding. She shared that her bridesmaids were unaware of the details, and many of them believed that I had overreacted, even after she explained that my ex and I had been together for a decade, and she had cheated on me with my brother. An act perceived as incomprehensibly cruel and unforgivable. Despite the severity of the situation, they remained unconvinced, still thinking I was being unreasonable and owed her an apology, So she gave up trying to explain my side of things to them, and even told them that they didn't have to attend our wedding if they didn't feel like it. She hasn't spoken to her friends in one whole day, and it seems really unlikely that they'll be attending. One of them even paid her back for the cost of the bridesmaid dress that she'd bought them all, and she thinks that most of them are going to skip. She's putting up a strong front for my sake, but I know she's hurting since these women have been her friends since high school. My fiance says she doesn't care, but I know she does deep down. So I've decided to talk to her friends and try to convince them myself. As for my ex, she has become quite a nuisance. Just a few hours ago, she somehow managed to call me and spent a whole 15 minutes trying to argue. She was insistent on convincing me that I was still in love with her, but just too proud to admit it. Why did she think so? Well, according to her, I went to such great lengths only to humiliate her. So it's obviously meant that I still did have feelings for her deep down. Yeah, she's right. But those feelings are of hate and disgust. For whatever reason, she believes. I just wanted to see her one last time, which is why I'd held her hands while she was talking. But honestly, that was just a shocker. Even more. I literally laughed in her face while talking to her, hoping that she'd get the hint, but she kept on blabbering about how we were soulmates and that I needed to call off the wedding before I made a huge mistake. Truly, the sole reason I'm considering any of this is to prevent her from making any regrettable decisions. I've been attempting to contact her parents to facilitate her removal, but so far, I haven't succeeded in reaching them. Consequently, I'm patiently waiting for their response. Once they step in, I'll finally be able to part ways with her for good. Don't get me wrong, I still hate her, but I also don't want her to hurt herself. I'm not that inhuman. Update 2. Hey guys! So we're officially married now. It's been a couple of days since the ceremony, and I still can't believe it. She's now my wife. I'm thrilled. But unfortunately, there's still sad news. Her friends ended up not showing up to the wedding, despite my attempts to get them to come. I personally called each one of them up to explain why I'd done what I'd done, and why I didn't want to apologize. But they didn't care much for it. Even when I asked them to attend just for my wife's sake, they weren't too hot on it. And that just seemed bizarre to me because I surely attend a friend's wedding, even if I didn't particularly like the person they were getting married to. I only learned the real reason yesterday when my wife finally confessed that she'd had a feeling her friends wouldn't attend. Whether or not I apologized simply because of the fact that she'd refused to do what they'd asked of her and had disagreed with them. They didn't like that one bit and believed that they were all one unit, so they always needed to have a united front. These friends from high school had been part of her life for a long time, and despite managing to keep the friendship intact over the years due to a lack of significant disagreements, this was the first time their bond faced a serious test. In this instance, she chose me over her friends, a decision that didn't sit well with them. She confessed to feeling a bit upset about the situation, but was too embarrassed to admit it, considering the whole situation to be juvenile. I didn't mind though, since at least now I was sure that this wasn't really my fault, and her friends were just self-centered. My wife even said that part of her was glad that they'd refused to attend, because she could finally stop trying to fit in all the damn time and could live life on her own terms without constantly having to seek her friends' approval. So that was good for us, I suppose. Also, my ex's parents finally responded to me on the evening before my wedding. I explained to them hurriedly what their daughter had tried to do and how they needed to get to the hotel she'd been staying in and take her back with them for her own safety because she was being really psychotic and delusional. I didn't feel it was appropriate for her to be left alone. It turns out they were on a hiking trip without network access. However, upon their return, they assured me that they would come to take her back as soon as possible and even expressed gratitude for informing them. I haven't received any updates since then, but I presume they successfully brought her back home. Update 3. Hi guys. It's been a week since my wedding, and unfortunately it's been nothing but drama so far. As I mentioned, my girlfriend or her parents hadn't been in touch with me since the last time I spoke to her parents. I'd assumed that they'd take her home, but apparently not. 2 nights ago, there was a knock at our door, and since it was really late, my wife and I had no idea who it could be, because we weren't expecting anyone. I made the mistake of opening the door before looking through the cameras, and when I opened up, my ex pushed past me and walked in with her bags. My wife was sitting on the couch and literally sprang to her feet as soon as my ex walked in. I was about to ask her what she was doing in my house, but before I could say anything, she told me that she was here to stay. She told me that her parents had come to bring her home a few days back, but she had refused to go since she knew that I would take her back soon. My wife and I were stunned and had no idea how to react because of how crazy all this seemed. She told me that her parents had tried to force it to go back with them, but she'd had a huge fight with them and ended up staying at the hotel. Now, she was running out of money and made the decision to move to my place. Her reasoning was that spending enough time with her again might trigger memories of the past and lead me to fall back in love with her. I was utterly perplexed and had no idea how to react due to the sheer strangeness of the situation. My wife tried to speak to her, but she ignored her presence altogether and continued speaking to me, demanding that I let her live with us. I told Rose gently, as I could, that I was a married man now, and she couldn't just show up here to live with me, but she said that she didn't accept the wedding, so in her eyes, I was still unmarried. I couldn't believe that this was happening, but neither did I have the heart to kick her out, because honestly, she seemed seriously unstable, and it appeared to me that she needed help. So I sat her down and told her to wait in the living room while I went to the bedroom with my wife to discuss what we should do next. Thankfully, my wife was also quite sympathetic, and knew there was something seriously off about how my ex was behaving. She needed serious professional help, and we realized it. I tried to get through to her parents, but they didn't accept my calls and texts back, saying that they couldn't force to come back anymore, and she was clearly too psychotic to live with them. Now, she was on her own. It was evident that her parents were embarrassed by her, and it was disheartening to witness how they were prepared to abandon their own daughter once they realized she was facing difficulties with no other options left. In response, I called my own parents and they arrived within half an hour. My ex had fallen asleep on the couch in the meantime, which turned out to be fortunate. Upon my parents' arrival, we decided to take her to a therapist as soon as possible, as her recent actions left us uncertain about what she might be capable of at this point. My wife and I let her stay that night because honestly, neither of us could bring ourselves to hate her anymore because of how sad the whole situation was. Clearly something had snapped in her mind, and she needed to be treated for it at the earliest. And the poor woman didn't even have her parents to count on anymore. My parents and I took her to the hospital the next day, and she was still rambling about how she was glad that I was finally coming around and had even started planning our wedding. We brought her to a mental health professional, but she adamantly refused, insisting that she felt perfectly fine. Despite numerous struggles and complications, the doctors were eventually able to calm her down with medication, including drugs whose names I don't recall. Following the treatment, she appeared considerably more composed. A couple of hours later, she finally expressed the desire to return home. I brought her home, and we let her rest in the room while my family and I sat in the living room thinking about what to do next. My wife and I were really relieved when she said that she wanted to go home now, and even helped her pack the stuff in the trunk of our car. We drove our home together. She remained silent throughout the ordeal, leaving us at a loss for words in such a challenging situation. Upon returning home, she apologized to both of us for the trouble she had caused and expressed her shame over everything that had transpired. My wife and I felt a sense of awkwardness throughout the interaction, but we reassured her that it was okay and advised her to prioritize self-care before heading back home. I didn't know if it would help or not, but I did contact my ex's mother and fill her in on everything that had happened. And I guess that finally made them realize the gravity of the situation. She told me that she's moved in with her daughter and said that she'll keep us updated. And despite whatever has happened so far, my wife and I truly wish that she gets better.